for taking a moment to join me and discuss the fantastic events of today. It is a milestone. It is great to see this reindustrialization and capacity coming back into our country. You touched on two things that have me intrigued. The first one is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. How does South Africa position itself and, ArcelorMittal position itself to take part in that and in terms of what's happening in the region and rail?
Let me start by saying that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has the potential to be the game changer. We live in a world of big economic power blocks. Think about it. China and India have populations of close to 1.5 billion each. The European Union and the United States are deep, wealthy markets. And so the option for South Africa is either to simply be leveraging off its relationship with these, or help to catalyze that same potential depth and breadth of markets in just about everything, whether it's the production of rail line or locomotives or widgets or clothing. Scale is everything. Markets that represent size and enormous buying power are markets that attract investors, and investors in turn drive industrialization. So our effort with the AfCFTA, it's a long acronym, is to knit together 55 national economies into a large market with 1.3 billion people. To do so, the first step has been to get an agreement on tariffs involving industrial goods and consumer goods. We're now working on services, finance and retail, those kind of areas. And then we're going to move to protocols covering areas like investment, intellectual property, and importantly, competition. So as we succeed in this, what we basically will be able to get is scale, is the ability to produce not for a small national market, but for a much larger continental market. And it's not simply that we will get the addition of the 55 national economies into one single market. It's that when you integrate, you also stimulate growth. When you do the kind of things that we're talking about, rail lines will be critical to Africa's future because goods will move across borders because you'll have regional value chains. If you look at Europe today, the Airbus is made by component manufacturers in many different parts of the European Union. And critical to holding them together is an efficient logistics system. And rail, of course, plays a key part in that. South Africa is well positioned. The African Union has designated the country as Africa's preferred rail supplier, and that would be your rail lines, as well as your rolling stock, from locomotives to wagons to coaches, but also all the other, let's call it the package of industrial and engineering services that goes with it. And as we see the scale of rail increasing on the continent with greater trade, if you're not trading with each other, you don't really need to connect with each other. So the rationale for more rail, better rail, stronger rail is off the back of movement of more goods and more people. And that's what the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will do. Now, this facility here will be Africa's only mainline rail manufacturing facility. So you can imagine that Africa is our oyster. It's open. It's available there for industrialists here to enter and to put up their wares. But there's another part to it. When we get scale on the continent, we're also able to leverage off that scale, because with scale comes additional capital investment, lower prices, greater flexibility, larger manufacturing establishments. And we can then look at providing rail solutions to other parts of the world. We have a free trade agreement with the European Union. We have a preferential access to the American market. We have good relations with many Asian countries. And so while our immediate focus will be Africa, we should not forget about the opportunities that there are in other parts of the world.
We now have a local manufacturer who can provide rails. We have local content and designation policies. We have saved a facility. We've created jobs, which is absolutely amazing. We now need the orders. How are we going to govern, and I use the word govern, because Transnet is known to go on its own little tangent, and I mean that with the greatest of respect. How are we going to govern that? How are we going to ensure that local is really given the preference that it needs to ensure that a facility like this survives?
Two parts to what we need to do. The first is on the demand side, which is where I think your question is focused. It's to get Transnet and PRASA to see that it makes commercial sense for them too to assist local production, that economies are ecosystems. And so when Transnet requires more orders from South African mines and South African factories, it comes from a growing economy. That growing economy is stimulated by the kind of localization effort that we see here. In addition to that, government is revamping its preferential procurement rules, and we are looking at localization playing a continuing important role in state procurement. So both PRASA and Transnet would be strongly encouraged to look for local solutions wherever these are technically feasible. There may well be some specialist rail requirements. I'm told that the Sishen to Saldanha line, for example, the technical requirements for that line cannot yet be met from this facility. But for much of the ordinary rail lines across the country that carries freight, I'm assured by the engineers here that what's coming out of this plant would be fit for purpose. So it's really encouraging and creating a regulatory framework to do that. So what have we done? The first thing is in South Africa's white paper on rail, which I'm sure that your readers would have carefully looked at, you would have seen the enormous focus on localization. It's an area that is not there accidentally. It came out of quite a detailed discussion in the National Cabinet where the Minister of Transport raised his policy proposal, and Cabinet was fully supportive of it and felt that what needed to be lifted and strengthened was localization. And so you see there that we're creating the policy framework. The new procurement bill that's going through Parliament will also have to look at localization as an element. And President Ramaphosa has put forward on behalf of all of government that localization, in other words, procuring from local suppliers where it is possible to do so, is an important part of South Africa's own growth plan. So that's on the demand side. I should add on the demand side, there's also the mining industry, that the mining charter encourages mining companies to localize some of their supplies. So it's a bonus for the big mining companies that they can now get points on the mining charter from their purchases of local mainline rail. In addition to that, it's the story of the African Continental Free Trade Area, because demand won't come only from Transnet and PRASA. So we've got to look at multiple sources of demand, and I've identified a few. The other part is the supply side, is to ensure that South African-made steel gets a reputation in the market that it is best in class, that in quality, in reliability of delivery, in turnaround times between when an order is placed and when it's satisfied, that our molds are able to meet the best requirements. And of course, price is not unimportant. Price is a function, yes, of scale. So the more orders a mold gets, the lower the unit price. And this is where we think a lot of focus needs to to be given on how to improve the overall productivity package of the mill. And that's driven by technology, by know-how. I was talking to the manager here about the quality of South African skills and what we can do to increase our skills base. The late head of Toyota South Africa, Dr. Johan van Zyl, invited me once, a couple of times to the Toyota factory, and we are partners, the DTIC, with Toyota's localization program. And as I walked around the plant, he would introduce me to his engineers. These would be typically young people. There would be female engineers, male engineers, black engineers, white engineers. And he would say, look, on this part of the production line, we second best in the world in the Toyota family. In this one, we number one. In this one, we number 4. And I said to him, Johan, where do you get your people? Because you're saying to me that you've got some of the best production runs in a company, Toyota, that is globally known for its focus on excellence. And he said, I get them from the same place that everyone else gets them, Minister. The only difference is we in Toyota work on the basis. Universities teach young people to think, we teach them to work. And so getting young South Africans who are coming out of our universities into the experience of this mill gives them that ability to know how to work. And they can leverage off the international capacities that ArcelorMittal has, as well as the partnerships that we in the South African public sector are developing with countries like Germany, Japan, China, and others, where there's now exchange of information and personnel to build up the productive capacity. So on the supply side, much can be done. And if you get these two right, you can really have sustainable businesses.
South Africa being the manufacturing hub for rail, according to Agenda 2063 in the African, 2063 in the African Union. When are we actually going to see that transition taking place in terms of us doing that manufacturing? And do you think there's potential for us to lose that opportunity because of where we find ourselves with no power, no water?
Some of Agenda 2063 is already beginning to be implemented. So the African Continental Free Trade Area is an aspect of it. South Africa is already providing rail and rail services to neighboring countries. And I went to Ghana a few months ago, and they had launched a new expansion of their rail system to bring ores and agricultural products from the center of Ghana to the coast. And there was a South African company that was their preferred service provider. So we're seeing the early signs of it already. But of course, we need to scale it up now. There are always dangers and challenges. The unreliability of electricity and the price of electricity, cuts in supply of water, challenges with infrastructure, your transport logistics. It's absolutely critical, because when we are the preferred rail supplier to the continent, people are going to look not only at price. We can influence price a little bit. We'll have tariff preferences against external suppliers, but we must always be mindful that there are other African countries with who would also want to get into rail manufacturing. And South Africa needs to secure its place, not because it's been put there under Agenda 2063, but because we produce the best, cheapest, most competitively sourced rail stock, rail components, and rail lines anywhere on the continent. And that requires the supply side reforms that I talked about. But it also means we've got to fix our energy supply. Absolutely critical. Energy is the lifeblood of any modern economy. And we're doing so. There's a few things being done. The one part is to fix Eskom. As you know, there's a new board, and it will require thoroughgoing reform. And my colleague, Praveen Gordhan, is working hard on that. But the other part also is to bring private players into the energy market. And we're doing that with renewable energy at the moment. We're going to be expanding renewable energy very significantly, and we're seeking to attract even more private capital into the energy market. The combination of the reform of Eskom is an important company. It will remain an important company, but it shouldn't be the sole supplier of energy to the country. So fix that which is broken and bring in new players. Also get a bit of competition in the market. At the moment, our system has a single a player that ultimately controls the entire place. But we're now generating an increasing quantity of renewable energy, and that's a good thing for climate change purposes, but also in bringing a bit of competition in the market. And what we're seeking to do with the other reforms that the President has announced is strengthen competition. Renewable energy is another supply of energy, but at the moment it's on a offtake commitment that's underpinned by the Eskom balance sheet and the commitments that NERSA will make in future. I'd like to see a market where players compete in producing the lowest cost electricity, because then local industry can benefit.
Well, there's certainly the demand for that.
Indeed. And had we spoken, if we had this interview in 2015, it would have been a bleak day, because this operation, this entire massive industrial complex had ground to a halt, and 2,000 workers were put in the street effectively. And this whole place was going to be broken down, physically broken down, in order to retrieve the metal in the plant and sell it as scrap. And today we see it's a vibrant industrial park with many different facilities operating here, 1,900 workers, and in addition to the structural steel mill, we now have a mainline rail manufacturing facility. So I hope a little bit of the optimism is also rubbed off, and in 4 years' time we can celebrate together.
We can celebrate together. Well, I look forward to that.